Hello and welcome. This is a new venture. It's called troubleshooting. We could have called it a number of different names, but essentially it's an agony uncle's corner for looking at problems and issues that people have. It'll come as no surprise to you to know that I get quite a large number of emails, and some of them present similar problems. Inevitably, I'm not going to use any names or to give any details that would allow people to be recognized. And almost always I ask before I do this in principle. So the question today is, and it's asked so often, I mean, it's perennial, and I've addressed it a number of times, but it does seem to me it might be an advantage to try and address it in Problem Corner, or troubleshooting. It's to do with why should Protestants convert when the Catholic Church seems to be in such trouble with the alphabet, or what word shall we call it? Alphabet invasion, alphabet takeover, alphabet. Well, a number of other words come to mind, but the alphabet people. The trouble is that the alphabet people begin by telling you that they want inclusion and end by telling you you're no longer included and close the door on the way out, please, or not. So we know that the Alphabet Project is one that is fundamentally anti-Christian and above all dislikes Orthodox Christianity, traditional conservative faithful Christianity. And another version of this problem is Gavin. What does it feel like to have jumped from the frying pan into the fire? In the Protestant frying pan, you face this for 40 years, you jump into the Catholic fire, and lo and behold, you've got Father Martin's, Father Martin, and a whole series of other people, including the Lavender Mafia, and we could go on. So, wasn't that silly of you? I want to do two things. I want to first of all talk about the Protestant and Catholic mindset, and then I want to talk about the nature of the church. So let me talk about the Protestant mindset first of all, because there are a lot of people who find that the Holy Spirit has really been working on them for a long time. Bit by bit, the Protestant project comes unraveled. Now, there is no triumphalism in this at all. I wasn't always very convinced of the Protestant project, but I didn't like what I kept on being told, always by Protestants, by the way, about Catholicism. Indeed, I developed a really powerful anti-Catholic reflex in me that I think was partly programmed, partly propaganda, partly spiritual, partly historic. And that can lead one to a form of ecclesial or fellowship paralysis, particularly as one sees, as has been happening in my lifetime, one sees the Protestant churches go down one by one. I'll never forget the first time I discovered when HTB, the Alpha Project, had a same-sex couples marriage program, which they kept quiet, of course. I felt completely betrayed. Even them? How is this possible? So let me describe, we're going back, talking first of all about the people who are becoming slowly less enamored with the Protestant project and become more open to what Catholicism is. Catholicism is always a very rich mine. It's full of saints and miracles and beauty and history and resilience. And once you get over the doctrinal stuff that's thrown at one, the spirituality is really very impressive. After all, where else do you find the saints? Where else do you find the miracles? Where else do you find the martyrs? Well, mainly, where else do you find the martyrs? Obviously, there are some Protestant ones. I remember particularly some amazing Protestant martyrs in the Soviet Union. Absolutely wonderful people. But Here's the Protestant mindset. What it does is it is trained to evaluate the church according to whatever criteria I have. So, charismatics are very good at this. Charismatics say, well, here's a tick box list of things that I would look for in a really good church. And then I've been part of the conversations lots of times. And they involve a whole series of variables: tongues, prophecy, leadership of women, Toronto blessing, yes or no, probably no. And then hands in the air, hands down, contemporary music of a hardcore performative nature or not. Cafe table layout in the church with newspapers and croissants or prayer books. So the list goes on, and then you choose the one that you like best. And that's how the Protestant chooses church. The Catholic mindset is completely different, and it's as different as Mac versus Microsoft. Probably that's not a bad analogy, really, because they look, the computers look the same from the outside, but the operating system is completely different. Catholicism has a totally different operating system. In fact, it's so different that the Protestant really finds it almost impossible to get their head round, which is one of the reasons why the process of conversion is so amazingly difficult. And it goes something like this. When the time comes, and we'll talk about that in a moment, for you to seriously consider becoming a Catholic, the point where you become a Catholic is when you leap, and in the leaping you give up your decision-making autonomy. In other words, when you join the Catholic Church, it's no longer your church, you belong to it. You say in the public space, well, when you're asked your opinions, well, I do have opinions, but actually I follow the teaching of the Catholic Church. I follow the catechism. It's a bit like a Protestant saying I follow the Bible, except it's always ruined because I follow my reading of the Bible, which is slightly counterproductive, at least in terms of Christian unity. So when you become a Catholic, you change altogether and you say, I belong to this church. And it may be that in the residue of your Protestant mind, you say, I can find 10 things I like about this parish church and 15 things I don't like about it, or 10 things I like and 5 things I don't like about it. But in the end, they're irrelevant and one should not act on them unless there's a very, very good reason. Sometimes there is. Well, that's another subject. One shouldn't act on them because one's going to Mass. And the Mass is the same at all times and in all places. St. Vincent de Lerins, the faith, always the same, all times, all places. Of course, in one sense, that's a simplification because we could talk about Novus Ordo and the Latin Mass. We could talk about Latin and in indigenous languages. We could talk about facing east and facing the people. We could talk about Gregorian chant and charismatic Catholic hymns, some of which are the worst things you've ever heard in your life and some of which are quite good. But effectively, all that gets suspended because I'm going to Mass. I'm going to the one and only place where I can authentically receive Jesus in the Eucharist and know, because it has a Catholic bishop, that it's the real thing. And know, because thanks to St. Augustine and Donatism, that the sins of the priest don't get in the way and don't stop the operation of the Holy Spirit. This is a tremendous thing. It's really quite wonderful. And because one of the things it does is you just relax. I remember the first time I heard an annual general meeting. This was just tremendous. My dear Protestant friends, get your heads around this if you can. The parish priest stood up. He was the dean of the cathedral. But he gets to be a parish priest. It's not the same thing as the Anglican route to stardom. And he said, well, so this is what we're going to do in the coming year. And then one or two slightly Protestantized people in the congregation put up their hands and said, Father, we haven't discussed this. No, Father said, You haven't. I'm telling you what we're going to do this coming year. And then there was this wonderful, wonderful pause. I just loved it. I can't tell you. I hugged myself with delight because I know that this is the moment in Protestant AGMs for all hell to break loose, for factionalism, for politics, for party spirit. This is the moment when it all happened. And I watched in this Catholic annual general meeting and nothing happened because of authority. Father said, and it happened, wasn't open for discussion. You could talk about it elsewhere if you wanted, but that wasn't how it was. It was not a democracy. Now, it's almost certain that Father had asked and consulted widely. It's almost certain that the clergy had paid proper attention and come to a good decision. But it wasn't happening in this kind of pseudo-democratic mob, potentially violent situation of a public meeting. Father, I just loved it. I thought, why? Why didn't I become a Catholic? Now, I remember when I was at theological college, there was a moment, forgive me for being garrulous, just for a second, and skip on a bit if you don't like this kind of stuff. It'll take me about 4 minutes. I remember it was a place called Jesus Church in Forty Hill. I'm very sorry if anybody there is still alive. I doubt it. But a very exciting vicar arrived, and the first thing he did was to split the congregation between those who loved him and those who didn't, and those who were with him in his changes and those who weren't. And the annual meeting was when all hell broke loose every single time, and people literally sat on both sides. I mean, the seats were arranged for the pro-vicar and the anti-vicar staff, and it was so pugnaciously explicit. I couldn't believe it, but and I remember thinking, well, this is one of the worst things that could ever happen in the parish. I don't want ever to see this again. I remember this when I listened to Father say at the end of the general meeting, here's what's going to happen, and it did. So now let's talk about a theology of the church that allows that to be. So the thing is, the Catholic Church is the church that Jesus founded. There are occasionally little lists that go round where you see people saying Anglican Church, founded by Henry VIII, Lutheran Church, founded by Martin Luther, Anabaptists, founded by Calvin, Quakers, founded by George Fox, and then everyone has a founder. Only one was founded by Jesus. It's the Catholic Church. We could argue, as Protestants always do, about what Jesus meant when he said, upon this rock I found my church. Is it the person of Peter, the apostolic nature of Peter, or is it what Peter thought or believed? The church, for hundreds and hundreds of years, thought what the Catholic Church has always believed. It only started to change it into a personal confession of faith in the era when the personal confession of faith really mattered, which was, of course, the 16th century. And it's a bit of a giveaway that it really wasn't a thing before then. Of course it wasn't. The mind of Jesus was given to the apostles, was given to the successors of the apostles, who explained what the mind of Jesus was, and the mind of Jesus has gone on being expressed. So it's the church that Jesus founded. And then the question is, particularly over the Alphabet Initiative, is infiltration by the Alphabet Initiative a sign of the church's failure and corruption, or something else? Well, it might be a sign of the church's failure and corruption. But in the case of the Catholic Church, it's exactly what you'd expect. It's a bit like a house fire. With the Protestant Church, the whole house is on fire and might burn down. The fire in the Catholic Church is a tiny wing, because the Catholic Church is huge, it crosses time and space. So there's a fire in a little outbuilding at the moment to do with the alphabet infiltration. But the thing is, it isn't going to win, because Jesus promised. There have been worse things happen. The Arian crisis of the 4th and 5th centuries, which St. John Henry Newman wrote about so clearly, was much worse. I mean, much, much worse. Awful. Arianism is the most disrespectful version of Christianity when it comes to Jesus. And most of the bishops have gone Arian. I mean, what hope was there? Except that God didn't allow it to, he stopped it. He reversed it. He brought the church back to its faith. Once you've seen the Arian crisis, as Newman had done particularly, and as I have too, reading Newman, well, this isn't worrying at all. But what is it a symptom of? The corruption of the church? Really not. It's a symptom that the devil is trying to destroy the church. Every time there's heterodoxy, every time there's heresy, of course it's to do with our sin. Of course it is. But it's also to do with the fact that the church is under attack. And I think that's the difference between the Alphabet Initiative in Protestantism and the Alphabet Initiative in the Catholic Church. I won't say what it is in Protestantism. It's not for me to say anymore. You decide that for yourself. But in the Catholic Church, it's a sign that the church is under attack. What do you do when the bride of Christ is being mugged? Do you say, well, I don't think I'll get involved. It's her fault. She shouldn't have worn such a beautiful bridal dress. No, you run to the rescue. I've run to, well, who am I to rescue anything? But I've run to be whatever help I can. I don't see it as a Protestant would see it, as a form of judgment on the church. I see it instead as a disclosure of the devil's hatred of the bride of Christ. And I'm here to struggle and fight. And that's the difference between the Protestant and the Catholic mindset, partly, in one sense. Now, when is the right time to become a Catholic? I think the answer is when God tells you to. How obvious is this? Well, when it happens, pretty obvious. Until it happens, not obvious, obviously. I think, I mean, to be honest, I asked God when I became a practicing Christian in my working hypothesis conversion in 1975 as a student. I said to God, well, now I'm going to follow Jesus. At least I'm going to do it for 48 hours to be revisited to make sure I'm not being made a fool of. Who shall I do it with? And I said, Lord, I quite like the Pentecostals. They've got a bit of life and fire to them. And I quite like the Catholics. They've got depth and dignity to them. So if you'd like to listen to me, Lord, either of those is fine. And the answer came, I want you to stay exactly where you are. You do it as an Anglican. I was very disappointed. And then spent really quite a long time trying not to become part of the Anglican establishment. So instead of being sent to theological college at Cambridge, I chose to go to the worst theological college there was in the country. Half of Borstal, half of the theological college. When I arrived, the person designated to show me around, I said, when did you become a Christian? He said, in prison, a couple of years ago. And the next man who joined him, designated to show me around, was a research scientist at Harwell. And I thought, I quite like this. A research scientist and an ex-con. That sounds quite real to me. But I thought to myself, perhaps I should have gone to one of the two theological colleges at Cambridge. And except that there was always the danger then that the enormous pride that I carry within me, as my closest friends know, would have got hooked. I didn't want to run the risk. I'd have preferred to be a Catholic then. But God said no. It took me then all the years until 2019, and then God said yes. So when should you become a Catholic? If you've seen that sola scriptura doesn't work. If you've seen that there are somewhere between 40 and 100,000 different ways of reading the Bible, and it doesn't work. If you've seen that church governance in Protestantism doesn't work. If you've seen that Protestantism led ultimately to liberalism and then atheism and then postmodernism. And why? Because the final arbiter of what was real was the person inside, me. And the movement from I will not be a Catholic, I will not submit, to all the other I will nots, then set that chain in operation. So if you're thinking of becoming a Catholic, you'll find that one of the most difficult things of all is the surrender of your autonomy. You give yourself to the church. You kind of get married, really. And then you accept the church's teaching. What do I think about papal infallibility? Well, once I've got over the propaganda and I discover what it really means, and by the way, I mean, at some point I'd like to offer you a long lecture on Newman, because the really funny thing is Newman became a Catholic, partly in order, of course, to accept the authority of the Pope, but he found the notion of papal infallibility utterly reprehensible. He hated it. He really, really found it difficult, but shut up about it and accepted it. And essentially, of course, what he was looking for, because he was really a rather bright man, he knew that there were two factors at work. One is the sort of the magisterium of the centre, and the other is the consultation of synodality. Of course, they both matter. But getting the balance right between an over-authoritarian centre and an over-anarchic people of God, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. But ultimately, instead of writing about his misgivings about the Pope, he became a faithful Catholic. He wrote in code, he let people know what he thought, but he never agitated against the authority of the Pope, although he did write about the importance of the consultation of the laity. It's the Catholic mind. One leads it to God, effectively and essentially. So I don't intend to persuade anyone to be a Catholic. It's got to be done at the right time, the right moment. I know people, sadly, who've become Catholic in a fit of enthusiasm, bless them, and as so often, Jesus tells the same story in the Gospels. They grow very quickly, the roots aren't deep, or an enemy plucks them out, and it all frazzles up. Better to wait and find the right time. But I hope this is helpful. And if it isn't, you don't have to listen to it. Nothing much hangs on it. I've got a number. I've got a stack of emails where people ask questions. If you would like to one of them, then just please write to me at gavin@ashenden.org, or do it through Substack, where it can so easily be done. And particularly if you're happy for it discussed in public, let us do it on the understanding that no names are ever used. And then I'd be very happy to give it some airing here if we all think it's helpful. Well, if this is good, it'll fly and get some viewing figures. If it's not good and it doesn't, well, then there are better things to do with one's time, which include the catechism and prayer. God bless you. God keep you on your journey.